Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of our fourth bilingual conference of education. Sorry about that. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, especially on a Saturday morning. But I'm sure that this will be a very interesting and productive day, just as yesterday afternoon was. My name is Dalinda Perez Alvarez, and I am the Deputy Head of International Recruitment at the University of Edinburgh. And it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, Johanna Stirling. Johanna is one of our speakers, and she is a freelance English language teaching consultant. She is based in the UK. She works as a teacher training, a materials writer, a presenter, and an online course designer, tutor, and manager. Most of her work is at NILE, the Norwich Institute for Language Education, where she is an affiliate trainer and MA tutor. In addition, Johanna works for Cambridge University Press as a writer and presenter. Johanna has written components for their course books Face to Face, English Unlimited, and Unlock. She is also the author and self-publisher of Teaching Spelling to English Language Learners and runs the spelling blog. We can share with you the URL in a second. She has presented at many conferences and other events around the world. Her main professional interests are working with teachers, materials development, the teaching of spelling in ELT, and online teacher development. So now we are very happy to listen to her talk, and the theme of today's presentation will be special needs in ELT, challenges and benefits. Welcome, Johanna. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Great to be here. I'm just going to share my screen with you. Okay. Oops, let's just go back. Okay. Can you see that? Can somebody give me a...
Yes, no problem.
Yes, brilliant. We can.
Brilliant. Okay, I've just been told that I'm competing with the Pan American Games, so I'm particularly grateful for you, for coming this morning. Yeah, I'm in the UK, so it's afternoon for me and it's autumn for me. So we've got, I was just thinking, there are some differences between us. Okay, and that's what we're going to look at today, is differences between people and how they can be challenging, but there can also be benefits. So we're going to have a look at special needs in English language teaching. So some challenges and some benefits. So this is what I want to look at today. First, what do we mean when we talk about a specific learning difference? And then I want to have a short focus particularly on dyslexia for two reasons. One is that I think it's probably the most common specific learning difference that we find in our classes. And the other is because it's the one that I know most about. But generally, we'll be looking at several learning differences, but even when we're looking at dyslexia. And then perhaps the main part is I want to look at how we can accommodate learners who have specific learning differences. But the things that I'm going to suggest, I think, are really useful for everybody else in the class. So it's not that we're having to do something that's completely different for them. It's more that there are things that we can do that will be useful for everybody, but especially useful for those people. Okay, so let's look. Okay, so we're looking here at specific learning differences, and we often call these SPLDs. Okay, some people take SPLD to mean specific learning difficulties. I prefer differences because they're not necessarily difficulties. People who do have these often do have difficulties, but the difficulties may not be inherent in their condition. It might be how education deals with them. So I think if we talk about differences, it's a healthier way to look at what's happening here. So we're going to look today at dyslexia, dyscalculia, ADD or ADHD, that's attention deficit disorder or attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, and dyspraxia. So all of those are specific learning differences. Autism also comes under special educational needs, but it's not actually usually classed as a specific learning difference. I have to say that I don't know too much about autism. I wouldn't want to be teaching you a lot about autism because I don't feel I know enough. But what I would like to do, because I understand that in your classes now, I think your classes are supposed to have become more inclusive, and that you have some children in your classes with autism. So there's something that I'd just like to show you about autism in the words of somebody who is autistic. And yeah, so this man here is called Chris Packham, and he's quite well known in the UK as a naturalist. So he does a lot of television programs about nature. I think he's amazing. And but also a few years ago, he told everybody that he is himself autistic. And he made a fabulous television series called Inside Our Autistic Minds. And I want to just play you the beginning where he explains what it's like to be autistic.
Beautiful, isn't it? It's my favourite place in the whole wide world. But what do you see when you look here? I imagine you see trees, green leaves, some branches, a beautiful woodland scene. But what I see is different. Because I'm seeing every trunk, every branch. I'm seeing the connections between them. And then I see the leaves. I can see the slightly different colours, slightly different shapes, any damage that's been done to them. As a naturalist, this is enormously beneficial. But sometimes all of this, the visual part of my world, is simply too much. It becomes utterly overwhelming. And that's because I'm autistic. In 2017.
Okay. Let me just go back to. All right. So Chris Packer made this program about autism, and he interviewed several different people who were autistic, and he spoke to their families. As you know, autism is on a spectrum, and he spoke to some people who were very high functioning and some people who were very low functioning. And he got some of them to make videos about themselves. And he shows the videos, they're great. Unfortunately, I think you might have problems watching this program in Chile because it's on the BBC and most of that is not available online. I'm going to show you a small part of the program where he works with an autistic young man who is non-speaking. And he worked with him to make a video, and they got somebody else to narrate the video. And I think it's just amazing. And it might give you an insight into what some of your autistic students, if you have them, are feeling. I'm afraid we're not allowed to record this part because it comes from the BBC. So I think Isabel is going to turn off the recording just for a minute, and we'll turn it back on. Okay, thank you. So I don't know if you found that as moving as I did. It always brings a glisten to my eyes when I watch that. I think it's so important for us to try to find out how people with different types of neurodiversity, how they actually feel, how it is for them to be in the classroom. And I would really encourage you to try to speak to your students, whether they're dyslexic, if they're on the autism spectrum, have ADHD, whatever it is, and just to try to find time to speak to them, and maybe to the parents as well, about what works for them and what doesn't. Okay, so what I want to look at now is we've got these 4 SPLDs here: dyslexia, dyscalculia, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and dyspraxia. And yeah, just having a look at those. So I'll just go through a little bit what these are. So dyslexia is where people have problems with writing and reading. Dyscalculia is similar, but with numbers. ADHD, sometimes called ADD, but usually now ADHD, is where people can't focus, and their mind is moving, and maybe their bodies are moving a lot more as well. And dyspraxia is where people have problems with their motor skills. So they might drop things, they might be clumsy, they might bump into things, that kind of thing. So I want you to imagine that you've got a teacher who's perhaps really busy, possibly not thought about these things, or possibly just not very kind, which I'm sure is not you. Okay, and what do you think the problem is? Which of these 4, or do you think that it's more than one of those? Now, it would be great if you wanted to put the answer into the chat. If the teacher says you can't even tell the time at your age, what do you think the problem might be? Can I just check, is the chat open to everybody?
Yes.
It is, okay. So if you just want to put in the chat, which of those problems do you think it might be where Mabel, that's a really good answer. The teacher's the one who's got the problem. That's true. It's not a very kind thing to say, but what do you think the problem might be for the poor student? Which of those four? Okay. Dyscalculia, Mabel suggests, true, it could be self-esteem, but that's perhaps a symptom of it. But which of those four that are in the top right-hand corner? I would say here probably dyscalculia. So dyscalculia is a problem with numbers, but also often with time. But having said that, also people with dyslexia can often have problems with telling the time as well. What about number 2? You mustn't keep bumping into people. It's rude. Look where you're going. Okay, and so Pilar suggests it could be dyspraxia, and Mabel suggests ADHD. And I think, yes, both of those are possible, especially dyspraxia. Dyspraxia means that you often don't have an accurate sense of space or of your body, and so that's likely to happen. But also ADHD, because if you're rushing about all the time, again, you might not have the awareness of other people around you, other people and other things. How about number 3? But we did this yesterday. Weren't you paying attention? What do you think the problem is there? Yeah, could be ADD. True, yeah. That's probably the most obvious one, ADD or ADHD. But it could also be dyslexia. In fact, it could be dyslexia or dyscalculia. Often students who are struggling with other problems in class, they're very focused on those problems, and then they don't always remember the bigger picture. So, but you're right, it's probably ADD or ADHD. How about number 4? What a mess, you're so untidy. Yeah, Mabel, could well be dyspraxia. People with dyspraxia are often very untidy. Often people with dyslexia are as well, because they have problems with organization, and possibly ADHD, and it can be dyspraxia as well. Number 5, go back to your seat and sit still for once. Yeah, probably ADHD is the most likely there. It's very difficult for people with ADHD to sit still for a long time, except sometimes they get hyper-focused on something and then you can't get them to move, but not so often. And the final one, you've written because B-E-E-K-O-Z, it's a common word, you should be able to spell it. Okay, yes, Mabel, Daniela and Pilar, and, oh, lots of people, yeah, all saying dyslexia. Yeah, probably that, although again, one of the important things about these SPLDs is that they co-occur. That means if you've got one, you're quite likely to have elements of another one as well. You may notice that in some of your students. Okay, so great. So those are some of the issues that we're looking at today. Okay, so I've got another little quiz for you here in a way. What I'd like you to do here is we're looking at what SPLDs are and a bit of information about them. Could you just read through this and see if you can work out what the missing words are. They're not completely missing. I've given you the beginning and the end of the words to help a bit. But I'm just going to give you a minute or so to look through. If you want to put the answers in the chat, you can. Up to you. Then it's up to you if you want to look at what other people have written in the chat or not. Okay. Just give you a few seconds to see if you can get some more. Okay, right. To save a bit of time today, obviously in class, I'd be asking you what you'd got, but to save a bit of time today, I'm going to actually, oh, I can see Jimena has actually put in some of those. Let's have a look together at what the answers that I was intending, although you might have some different ones. Okay, so specific learning, sorry, that should say differences and not difficulties, or SPLDs, affect the way information is learnt and processed. Okay, so it is about the processing, the way that the brain deals with information. They are neurological rather than psychological, and what that means is that there's actually a physical difference within the body. We'll have a look at that in a second. And they usually run in families. In other words, it's genetic. We'll look at that in a second as well. And occur independently of intelligence. If you remember the little video that we watched from Murray, the guy who was non-speaking autistic, his plea to people was that, please, don't treat me as if I'm stupid. I'm not stupid. And it's the same with dyslexia and other SPLDs. The SPLDs can have significant impact on education and learning and on the acquisition, got a very sensitive keyboard, and on the acquisition of literacy skills. Okay, especially for that one is dyslexia, of course. Okay. If anybody's got any questions about any of this, either ask me now or if not, probably best save them till the end. Okay, so what I want to do is to look at dyslexia as an example. And as I say, this is because it's the most common of the SPLDs that we see, and also it's the one that I know most about. So let's have a look at what dyslexia is. You all know that we've got two hemispheres to our brain, and you may know that the two hemispheres in most people are slightly different sizes. One is a little bit bigger than the other. I can never remember which it is, but one's a little bit bigger than the other. However, in brain scans, they've found that people with dyslexia, the hemispheres are the same size, which I think is really interesting. I don't know exactly what that means, but what it means to me is it shows that it is a neurological problem. It's a physical problem, that the brain is actually different. Okay, and so I can remember once somebody saying to me, a Polish teacher, was talking about a student and said, but she's only dyslexic in English. And it really made me think, well, how can somebody be only dyslexic in one language? You're dyslexic or you're not, although there are degrees of it. But what she meant was it only shows up when she's speaking English. But yeah, either you are dyslexic or you're not. Okay, and the other thing that I mentioned before is that it's genetic. Several people in my family are dyslexic. I don't think I am, but yeah, and so you'll often see, if you do know families where someone's dyslexic, you often find that. And it is similar with some of the other SPLDs as well, and also with autism. Somebody I know has autism. She's a mum. She's a single mum with 4 children who are also on the autism spectrum. I don't know how this woman copes. And one of her children, at least, I know, is severely autistic and is non-speaking. So, yeah, certainly runs in families. Although it's also quite possible to have other children who are not dyslexic. And also, there's this very important point about intelligence, that none of these are related to intelligence. People can be extremely intelligent, extremely creative, even if they have an SPLD, such as dyslexia. So all of these people here either have said that they've got dyslexia or are suspected to have had it. So I don't know if you know all of these people. Here we've got Bill Gates. Name's just gone. Richard Branson, who is an entrepreneur, Virgin Airlines, you probably know. Albert Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, Jamie Oliver, the chef, Cher, Tom Cruise, Walt Disney, Pablo Picasso, Oscar Wilde, John Lennon, and Winston Churchill. So all of those people have done great things in their lives, and all of them are at least thought to have been or currently are dyslexic. So it's really important that we don't underestimate any students we have who are dyslexic. Okay, I was talking about the brain being different, and this is some research. I'm really sorry I don't have the reference for this, and I don't even know that I understand it completely. But with MRI scans, they've been able to identify that a reader with dyslexia, different parts of their brain light up compared to somebody who doesn't have dyslexia. Okay, and so there are these very definite physiological differences. And it seems, from what I understand here, it seems that a non-dyslexic brain uses different parts of the brain to understand when reading. And whereas the dyslexic brain is looking too much at the articulation and looking at the sound and not being able to employ other strategies when reading. And this is interesting. I always like to know how people with different ways of learning, how they see their condition. And here, somebody has drawn a picture of how their brain works and how they think a non-dyslexic brain works. So the one on the right, the dyslexic person thinks that non-dyslexic brains have everything organized in their brain. They're all in, information is in little drawers. And also that there's a roof over the top that stops the other information coming in, the distractions, if you want. Whereas her own brain, she says, is like a greenhouse. And so she can see everything and it's all coming in at the same time. And so it's very difficult to focus and there's not that same level of organization. And what's interesting to me is that that's very similar to what Chris Packham was saying in the first video we watched about how he sees every little detail and how that can be overwhelming. Okay, so let's just have a look at some aspects of learning that dyslexia can affect. Okay, one of them is memory. And I think this is a really, really important aspect, and it's not always what people think of when they think of dyslexia. So dyslexia can affect the working memory at the front of the brain. And so very often students forget what they've just heard, okay? Whereas other learners can hold things in their brain, very often dyslexic learners can't. So, and I've often seen this if they're trying to copy something from the board, whereas a non-dyslexic learner will look at something on the board and they'll remember several words and they write them down, and then they look up to see the next few words and they write them down. A dyslexic learner is sometimes looking at one letter, looking at the next letter, looking at the next letter. That's exhausting, okay? And so we have to remember that the working memory is often, they're often not so bad at longer term memory, but the very short term memory can be severely impaired. Organization is often a problem. Sequencing is a problem. You'll be aware that dyslexic people very often mix up the order of letters, and that's what this is. It's about organization and sequencing, and so it affects other parts of their life and learning as well. Because of all of these things, self-esteem is often very low. It might not be the dyslexia itself that's causing the self-esteem. It might be how the rest of the world react to somebody with dyslexia, and how they might think that they don't fit into the world. Let's look more specifically at language learning. So one of the problems is linking spelling with sounds, especially you've got something like CH. Some dyslexic learners might think that that's a K and might not recognize that as a ch. So, but that's something that we can actually work with. So that's easier. Grammar can be difficult as well. It's similar. It's about this sequencing again, and it's remembering things. So they can be bad. So spelling and grammar and meaning as well can be difficult, partly because students are having to focus so much on the spelling, on the grammar, that it's hard for them to find space in their brains to think about meaning. So we need to always, for me, in language, meaning is paramount. It's the most important thing. So we always need to make sure that we're giving them enough space to think about meaning. And finally, focus. Focus is really difficult for people with dyslexia or with other SPLDs. Okay. So if you want to know more about dyslexia, there's a course, a free course that you can do online. I'll send the link later, which is really good, and it's specifically for language learners, teachers of language learners. Delinda, did you want to say something or not? I didn't know if you...
I was just looking at the time, but I think that we're fine. We have 20 minutes, so
Yeah.
I'm guessing that if we want to give time for questions, that would be just something to consider. Sorry to interrupt.
I'll try, yeah, in about 10 minutes, yeah. Okay.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you. So what I want to look at now is some accommodations for learners with SPLDs. So things that we can do to make them comfortable, to make them do their best in our classes. But really important for me is that if we've got a mixed class, some people with SPLDs and some people who haven't got those, then it needs to be useful for everybody. So let's have a look at some things. All right, so one thing we can do first is to make things multisensory. We're going to look at all of these things in more detail, so I'll just go through them quickly now. Also, we need to think about timing. People with dyslexia and SPLDs often need more time. The presentation and instructions, how can we make those really clear for our students? How can we help them with organisation? Self-esteem, how can we boost their self-esteem and certainly not make it lower? And how can we help them to focus? So I've got some hints here for you. So firstly, making it multisensory. I'm just going to have a look at grammar to start with. Let's say we're at a fairly low level, we're teaching, let's say we're teaching the present simple, and we've got a sentence like, she likes football. So if we use, I don't know if you're familiar with, show you, with these rods, whoops, these are all different coloured rods, but you can use bricks or whatever you like. So it's too awkward for me to show these. I'm going to have to show it just on the screen. And so we can show students, like this can always be the pronoun, the green one can be the verb, for example. And so we can lay these out and to show what a sentence looks like. Okay, and we can get students to do this themselves. If they're touching things, it makes it easier. And then when we're ready, we can move on to questions. And we can show that when we make a question, we've got a very similar structure, except we haven't got that S, but we need to add the auxiliary verb there. So we can give that a different colour, and we can show that the S from like goes onto that auxiliary. And then we can draw the arrows to show that that S goes there and that otherwise it's the same. If we look at a simple, present simple with the verb to be, we can show how easy it is to do that. We do the same thing, same structure, but to make a question, we just turn around the verb and the pronoun. And the student can actually move around those bricks. I'm not going to do that one because we don't have time. It's a bit of a shame, but right, let's move to the next one, giving extra time. Now, this is one that's really difficult to do when you've got some students with SPLDs and some who haven't. So a few little hints for you here. You could tell your students, if they're dyslexic, for example, you could tell them, okay, in the next lesson, we're going to be doing this reading from the course book. If you want to, you can look beforehand. They may not, but that would really help them if they did. You could say to everybody, here's this exercise, there are 10 items, and then you can quietly say to the dyslexic students, you do 5, okay? Or, you know, for other students, write 250 words, okay, just quietly to those ones, see if you can write 100 words on this. So they're still doing the same work, just not so much of it. When you ask a question, let them think for longer. Don't let the other students shout out the answers. Waiting longer is good for everybody. And as I mentioned before, avoid having them copy things off the board because it takes them forever and they probably won't do it in time. So they can take a photo if they've got a phone, or you could just print it out for them. Okay, when we're presenting language, for example, some things that we can do, make sure your writing is very clear so they can read it. If it's on a photocopy or something, make sure there's lots of this lovely white space. It doesn't have to be white, as we'll see in a minute, but lots of space. If you've got a lot of things crowded on together, it can be very difficult to read. And you may, for dyslexic students, some dyslexic students have problems with black on white because there's too much contrast. So consider using a coloured background. When you give instructions, make sure they're staged. Just tell them one thing that they need to do at a time, not you're going to do this and then you're going to do this and then you're going to do this, and they're not going to remember all of that. It's helpful to give instructions orally and also written, but make sure that the oral instructions and the written instructions say the same thing. Really useful to give an example or 2 or 3 so they know what to do. Ask them questions to check that they have understood. And also, when they start, monitor, go around quickly, make sure everybody's on task. Now, all of these things, I would say, are absolutely useful for everybody in the class, not just for students with SPLDs. So I'd really recommend that you did those. Organisation, colour can often be useful. Their folders, making sure that they've got things in folders and well organised. It could be a homework task to organise their folders. Checklists that they make themselves or that you give them. And getting them to share strategies. The ones who are very organised can share strategies with those who are not. Sorry, this has gone a bit disorganised as well. Building self-esteem. They don't have to have easier work. You just have to make it more accessible to them. People receive feedback in a different way. So if I said to one student, or one student read my feedback, and my feedback was, you've done this quite well. So one student thinks, oh, that's nice, I've done it quite well, I'm very pleased. Another student says, I've done this quite well, I want to do it very well. And they feel really sad about it. So we have to be really careful about this. And one of the ways we can do it is to feedback on the task and not on the person. And let's see what we mean by that. So if we have task involving feedback, we're saying, do this to improve. Here are some things that you can do to improve. But if we feedback on the person, if the feedback is on the ego, then you might say something like, you're the best, or you're good at, or you don't try hard enough, or the worst one, you can't. Now, what happens if we do that? If it's task involving, we get the student to think. If it's ego involving, then the student reacts. They have an emotion. And even if we say, you're the best, that's quite dangerous, because then they always want to stay the best. And then often they don't take risks, they don't try. And of course, to say you don't try hard enough or you can't can be very damaging to their self-esteem. And the last one I want to look at is focus. How can we help our students to focus when they find it very difficult? Firstly, one thing at a time. As I said with the instructions, don't give lots of instructions at the same time, just one thing at a time. And as far as possible, remove distractions. We all in the modern world get easily distracted, but some more than others. I don't know if your students are allowed mobile phones in class. They can be extremely useful, and some students need them to help with spelling. It might be good for them to take photos of the screen and things like that, but they're also extremely distracting. So I think it's a good idea to have a rule that the sound must be off, and the phone should be upside down so they don't see notifications. Maybe they put them in their bags or whatever, something you'd have to negotiate with your school and with them. A more difficult one is removing them from very distracting people. And you may find that the very people who get distracted are the ones who also distract others. So this is not easy, but if you can do that, you know, rather than having all the people who've got these issues together, it might be better to spread them out more. But also trying to get them to focus on one activity. I'm sure you know you give out a handout. You want to put things on both sides of the handout because it saves paper. But you know that some students immediately look at the wrong side of the paper. Okay, and so just be aware of that. No, this side of the paper. It's good to hold the paper up, look at this side. Okay, and one more. This is a thing I just wanted to show you that I find really useful. I cut out 2 pieces of card like this, and then I can't really show you because I haven't got a third hand at the moment, but if you've got a page with lots of different activities on, you can just put this over. So can I do this? So the student just sees the part that they should see. Okay, and that really helps them to focus. Right, okay. Oh, and yes, sorry, one more thing, which is to give them breaks as well. All right, just 3 things to avoid. I'll be very quick, Delinda. Try not to test too much. Testing isn't teaching, and these are the students who may fail. You don't want them to be failing too much. Sometimes we have to test them, but keep it to a minimum. I would avoid competitive games, especially if they're done individually. Team games, not so bad. Again, we don't want them to be constantly losing. And be careful with multiple choice, especially for spelling, because sometimes they just get confused, more confused than they were before they started. Okay, so now time for your questions. I'm very happy to try to answer your questions. As I say, I'm not an expert, especially in autism, but know a bit more about dyslexia, some of the other SPLDs. So fire away.
Thank you, Johanna. And sorry if I put a little bit of pressure on you earlier today. It has been so interesting and so useful. Very, very useful. We already have a question on the chat. Mabel Avila is asking, what if they do not want some help because they feel that they aren't different from their classmates?
Fantastic question. This could be But I do think it's really important, if you can, to get one-on-one time with them at some time, and just say, is there anything that will make it easier for you, rather than us presuming what will make it easier. But I think you're absolutely right. They don't want to seem different. And that's why all of those accommodations that I've just shown you, almost all of them, I would say do them for all of your class. I don't think they need to do different work. The only thing that I think needs to be different is the time. And this is tricky, that they often need more time. That's why I'm suggesting doing things like saying quietly to them, if you want to read this first before the class, you can. Or, you know, if you want to write something that's shorter, that's fine. So don't make it public, and give them the choice. But it just means that they might have more success. So I think it's about, you know, not making a big thing of it in class. And as far as possible, I think all of those accommodations, I think they're good practice in a language class. I think there are an awful lot of similarities between the challenges that dyslexic people have and the challenges that language learners generally have. And so I think making things clear is great for all of our students. So I hope that partly answers your question, Mabel.
Thank you. I have a question, Johanna.
Yeah.
How do you present a student with this with dyslexia or to other students in the class? Do the other students just, they are part of their class and that's it, or do you need to introduce them in a particular way to the rest of the classmates?
Okay, another great question. For me, I would not, probably. I find it depends. If I'm teaching older students, they sometimes tell everybody else, especially if I often teach teachers, and sometimes I've got a teacher who is themselves dyslexic, and they might say, and what's really nice is I've noticed that in more recent years, people have been much more, felt much more able to do this, because I think the stigma is much less now. We talk much more about neurodiversity, and but if not, I think, again, I would talk to the student and just say to them, if you want to tell other people, you can, but if you don't, that's not a problem. I don't think we want to really flag up differences. We want to flag up similarities. And we want, very often, people with dyslexia that I've known are often very creative, and often, and this is particularly with dyslexia, and often very good people. Yeah, very good at forming relationships, possibly because they're trying to mask the difficulties that they have. You know, I think, no, let them cope with it in their way. We're just making, when I talk about the accommodations, what I'm really doing is trying to take away the obstacles. I'm not trying to really make things easier for them. I'm just trying to take away the things that make it more difficult for them. So yeah, the short answer is no, I probably wouldn't announce it.
Thank you, Johanna. And I loved the way you said to flag up similarities rather than differences. That's great. One last question. Pilar Zárate is asking, do you think the flipped classroom approach would give all children the time to process information in advance at their own pace and thus reduce anxiety in the classroom?
Great questions, Pilar. We've had all great questions. Yeah, really interesting. Yes, I think there are a lot of very good things about the flipped classroom. If other people aren't, I don't know how much it's used in your region, but so this is people perhaps watching a video or reading something beforehand and then using class time to process that and practice it. And I do believe there are some problems with it. It's always difficult when some haven't done it. There are ways around that, but yeah, I think it's definitely something to try. Then you do have, when they come into class, you have got a much more level playing field. I don't know if you know that idiom, we say that, so everybody's starting at a similar place. They've had the same opportunities anyway. Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I just think that there are some problems with it, and I don't know whether everybody is, whether there'll be technological problems with that. I don't know enough about the contexts where you work, but I think it's definitely worth a try. And Pilar, do you have any experience of doing that? Or anybody? Well, okay.
Yeah, Pilar just said yes recently.
Yeah, okay. I mean, and if your experience is that it helps, then yeah, please share that. But yeah, I think it's a great idea if the practicalities work.
Thank you, Johanna. Well, thanks for the excellent presentation. Super interesting and an excellent way to start today's sessions. Everyone is saying thank you, and Vanessa especially saying loved your tips and suggestions. So thank you for a very successful first first presentation. So everyone, I want to say that we have a 9-10 minute break. The next session will be at 10:10 this morning, Chile time. It'll be a presentation by Jacqueline Paez, and it'll be in Spanish. The topic will be Desafíos de Inclusión en Educación Superior. So thanks everyone, and we'll see you in around 10 minutes. And thank you again to Johanna.
Bye, everybody. Enjoy the conference.
Thank you.